بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في قطر وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم فرج عن عبادك في غزة وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Okay. So we are continuing our reading of this article, Can China Save Capitalism? And this is our fifth session. We are going to start from here. Peasant unrest. Peasant unrest has led to migration of between 110 to 150 million people to the cities. Not sure why. They perform slave labor in atrocious conditions in cities, I guess. Since the mid-1990s, between 50 to 80 million workers have been made redundant due to the restructuring of state enterprise. Restructuring is another way of saying that, they've been running at loss. You get rid of workers, try to make sure that those losses are recovered or there are no more losses. For example, that's one way, one reason there is restructuring. But there can always be many other reasons. Workers' protest movement has been sustained by support from both the rural migrants and resident ex-employees of state-owned enterprises and have risen dramatically since the mid-1990s. Factory closures have not been resisted, and protests concentrate on inadequacy of redundancy payments. So they are not trying to keep the factories open, but the protests are focused on redundancy payments. Moreover, there were very few instances of plant level resistance spreading throughout the city or region. However, these protests were successful in achieving major pension and redundancy payment reform, which was enacted by 2001, and since that year there have been no major resistance movement of laid-off workers. Okay. The anti-redundancy movements were concentrated in the Rust Belt, dominated by heavy capital goods making plants. Since 2001, a wave of strikes have also hit the Sun Belt, the home of the new expanding export-oriented firms. The new wave strikes are also defensive. They are best seen as demands for the effective implementation of the existing labor law. They are defensive in that they protest denial of workers' rights as defined by the existing law, especially failure to pay wages on time. So they are not against the system, but it's malfunctioning or it's not functioning properly. They are best seen as demands for the effective implementation of the existing labor law. Thus, these struggles are not against capitalism, but against capitalist violations. Capitalists who violate capitalist law to compensate for declining profit rates. Profits in Chinese export-oriented industries have been fallen since 2002 due to overproduction and intensified competition. So capitalists try to compensate for their declining profits through not paying the laborers. The working class protests in cities such as Shenzhen are trying to use the power of the capitalist state to discipline capitalist enterprises. Workers' protest against systematic non-implementation of capital law is tolerated as long as it remains spontaneous, that it is not organized. Spontaneous, plant-specific, non-political, and does not involve the organization of independent unions. That is non-communist dominated unions. In my view, that's the author's view, there is no evidence that the new wave unrest seriously threatens the dominance of the existing governance system. I see the Chinese incumbent regime as headed for the gradual piecemeal introduction of the type of social democratic reforms that were introduced in Germany during the last decade of the 19th and the first decade of the 20th century, which will partially solve the problem of unrest, I guess. China is now a full-fledged non-liberal capitalist economy. Non-liberal capitalist economy is non-liberal, not necessarily anti-liberal. Non-liberal capitalist economy like late 19th century Germany and Japan, with the commodification of land and labor, the intermingling of corporate and state property, and the systematic dominance of finance capital. I mean, that's obviously the hallmark of capitalism. So Chinese economy is a capitalist economy for sure, albeit non-liberal and heading towards heading towards some sort of social democracy on the pattern of Germany and Japan in the late 19th century. Okie dokie. China has also succeeded in developing an authoritarian capitalist state structure during the first decade after the introduction of the four modernization. China has also succeeded in developing an authoritarian capitalist state structure as against socialist. During the first decade after the introduction of the four modernization, which led to the defeats of the imperialist-funded 1989 unrest and avoided the type of implosion of the state and party that the USSR and East Europe experienced. The capitalist state structure during the first year after, which led to the defeats of so it's a strong state structure, capitalist state structure, which is able to defeat imperialist funded unrest, and on the other hand, in economically social democracy, which will help, or which has helped, or is helping to reduce discontent among laborers and peasants. Number 18, 7. The trend has not yet completed. Dominance of capital finance, the trend hasn't yet completed, so it's not fully finance-dominated capitalist state. 18, the 18, number 18, the footnote number 18, that this is not to deny that much of China remains pre-capitalist at the social level, I guess. And also at the state, capitalist property and finance has not penetrated many parts of the economy, and state authority is not fully articulated as an agent of capital accumulation. So China, on the one hand, it has developed authoritarian capitalist state structures and capitalist enterprises, social democratic capitalism, but that hasn't penetrated evenly to all parts of the state as well as society. So in many ways, it's a capitalist country, but on the other hand, in many ways, it's a pre-capitalist country. So it's a country in transition, I guess. It's still in transition. I think that we should look at that footnote again. This is not to deny that much of China remains pre-capitalist. Capitalist property, that is property dedicated to accumulation and finance, which is capitalist property par excellence, has not penetrated many parts of the economy and state authority, despite the fact that despite the fact that part of economy and state structure is capitalist. So it's not fully articulated. Many parts of the economy and state authority is not fully articulated as an agent of capital accumulation. Okay, because once a state is articulated as a full agent of capital accumulation, then the state is fully capitalist. Okay, the economic power of the state is reflected in the continuing strength of both the state-owned enterprises and local governments, which own a great deal of financial capital and are major players in the land market. Local governments and state-owned enterprises, in the strength of state-owned enterprises and local government, which itself is an enterprise to a certain extent. A great deal of financial capital are major players in the land market, own a great deal of financial. Unlike foreign firms, and state enterprises are seen as the development arms of the government. Unlike foreign firms and joint ventures, state firms provide mainly for the domestic market and not for the exports. So that's they provide the stability to the economy, structural stability, I guess. Since 1998, reducing dependence on foreign markets and increasing production to serve domestic demand has been a major objective of state economic policy. Although exports have risen significantly since China's entry into WTO in 2000, and the export to GDP ratio and an export to GDP ratio stood at 37% in 2007, so it has increased. So that's why this counter balance which the state enterprises and the state governments and the local governments provide. Infrastructure and infrastructure investment by the state is specifically directed to this end. That is to, what is this end? Reducing dependence on foreign market. During the 1990 to 2006, over 90% of investment in China has been domestic market oriented, and rates of return to domestic investment have been exceptionally high. And rates of return to domestic investments have been exceptionally high, which means that they will grow. The Chinese labor force especially that employed in domestic and state enterprise, has been ruthlessly exploited, and in a typical year, more than 40% of GDP is absorbed in capital formation rather than paying paying back to to the workers. Okay, many of China's new billionaires have been emerged from the ranks of the state bureaucracy and maintain their links with both state and party apparatuses. In 2007, there were estimated to have been 7 billionaires in dollar terms and 300,000 millionaires in China. That's not that much. They have been the major beneficiary of state enterprise privatization. Close link with the party is good for business. Managers of state enterprises and banks, like their German and Japanese predecessors, function as state capitalists. Managers of state enterprises and banks, like their German and Japanese predecessors, function as state capitalists. Many of them own shares in workers' cooperatives and state corporations. The banking system, which is still 80% state-owned, although it is being cautiously privatized, is very generous source of cheap investment finance, especially for local government ventures. Over 50% of bank financing is state-owned enterprise. Over 50% of bank financing is for state-owned enterprises. State bank financing played a major role in preventing collapse of a state enterprise during 2000-2004. This accentuates the crisis management role of the state. Okay. Economic liberalization has been a state project in China since 1978, as it was in Bismarck's Germany. The growing role of the Communist Party and the State Council remains crucial in the whole process. That is the process of economic liberalization. The form of state governance has been restructured to foster bourgeois dominance of the social order. That's what economic liberalization requires, and some would say also the state form. The state has not shrunk in the process. Quite the contrary, it has sprawled, and the complexity of state social intervention has increased enormously. Quite the contrary, it has sprawled, and the complexity of state social intervention has increased enormously. The essence of this state sprawl is the restructuring of a new relationship between central and local government. The central government remains firmly in command, and market and society liberalization occurs not spontaneously but in response to the promulgation of new laws by the states, the state directed. This has been accompanied by downward shifting of state power. Autonomy of local, especially city governments, have been expanded significantly. Fictionalization of the party seems to have. Is this fictionalization or financialization? I think probably we should stop here rather than rushing. Start from here. Next time, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa azwajihi wa dhurriyyatihi ajma'in.